For a long time, I've been working under the impression that rational thinking is the best way to, I guess, convince someone of something. So let's say you're in some, or I'm in some argument with the person, and I believe, because I believe rationale should prevail, I will try and make a rational argument with someone. But as I get older and have more experience in the matter, it doesn't seem that way. It doesn't seem like rationale wins. And I guess it makes me a little upset. And usually the way it works, when you get upset, you kind of do a double down. And I see that not just in myself, but in other people. I'm sure you've had an argument with someone when you know that what you're saying is true, and the other person is it just makes that person more and more angry. And I've been on a pretty long quest to try and figure out ways around it, and it just doesn't seem like I'm getting there using the framework I have now. So what I'm trying to say is that the more I try and use ration, the less likely it works on people. It's very few people that will actually go along with it. It could just be the people that I've been communicating with. It could also be factor, me. I know that sometimes when I do argue with people, I might get under their skin. I don't know. I'd have to get someone else's interpretation of that. How I guess my personality makes it, how other people interpret my personality. So rationale does not work as good as I'd hope it work. But now that, like I said, as I get more experience, it seems as if it's not emotional arguments, just using emotion helps people change their mind, or actually helps motivate people in certain directions, and then that will hopefully, or not hopefully, but will eventually change their mind. Let me explain. I was arguing with my buddy the other day. It was on his birthday. I called him to wish him a happy birthday, ended up offering him an argument, and well, in the beginning it was interesting because usually people don't take arguments as far as I would like to take them. I believe, like I said, the whole rationale thing, and then I guess I'll get to the emotional part in a minute. So in the beginning he was with me, and I was going over how I believe, like as I'm talking right now, emotion seems to be more of a motivator than ration. And he was agreeing with me, and I was laying out some theories, which probably a good idea to make a video on eventually. But essentially, it works like this: biological evolutionary stance. I'm not an expert in all that, but the idea essentially is we evolved from lower primates, or from just lower creatures, and certain instincts were passed on evolutionary wise. So emotions, I was trying to say that emotions was the first form, I guess, in which we started living, right? It's, I can't say consciousness, but it's just, let's say it's the beginning basis of our thought. And then from that, we grew a higher, a consciousness, or a, higher form brain. And then that allows us to reason. Anyway, I think I'm getting too far into it, but I was saying, let's say, it's like apes. They don't have a higher sense of reasoning. They can't do a whole lot of. They can communicate, but they can't talk, and they can't do complex things like we can. And so, what I was saying is that since we had that, let's say that lower level, the unconscious, let's say the emotions are unconscious or reflexive things that left over from millions of years of evolution. That system was in place a lot longer than our consciousness, and so since our biological system was built on top of the emotions, then I believe that emotions are much more persuasive on the rest of our minds than just our consciousness. Okay, so what am I saying? What I'm saying is that once, let's say like I have to look more into this, but let's say like you see something or you hear something. It goes in through your brain, or through, let's say sound goes in through your ears. You process it at an unconscious level, and then you have access to it through your consciousness, meaning that it gets processed before your consciousness processes it. Meaning, if emotions are processing information before you do, then whatever your emotions are telling you, let's say it can influence it. Let's say your emotions will process it before your consciousness does in a negative way. Once it gives it to your consciousness, then your consciousness will be influenced with it, right? A negative emotion will influence your consciousness to have a negative twist on it, which is one of the things I was talking to him with. He's a physician, so that's I was just kind of passing it by him. He doesn't do a whole lot of psychology, but he's a surgeon, so hopefully that wasn't his realm. It's not really my realm, but it's just nice to talk to somebody about that kind of stuff. Anyway, so we were talking about that, and we're going through, and it was nice to have this conversation. I don't usually have this kind of conversation with people, and we're going through, and everything's fine up until a point, and then he started kind of getting a little upset. What I was trying to talk to him about is that once a person gets emotional about a certain topic, it becomes a little bit more difficult for that person to talk about it without that emotional stranglehold on whatever it is. And I need to do a little bit more reading on how, emotions affect reason and just reasoning, I guess. And just from my anecdotal experience, I know when someone gets upset, it starts to go downhill from that. People start to shut down. They're not responsive or receptive of whatever the idea is. Anyway, so we started off really good. Again, remember, it's on his birthday. So even if it is on his birthday, I wasn't giving in at all. So we're talking about how it's probably most likely the case, evolutionary speaking, as soon as something gets upset, and then, once a person gets angry, I'm sorry about that. That was my phone. As soon as a person gets angry, that anger, whatever that part of the brain that gets angry, kind of sucks up all the resources, all the processing power, and so it's just a layman's theory on why anger makes people, I guess, do certain things. So anyway, so let's say you get angry, a part of your brain starts sucking up all the processing power, which strangles the rest of the brain. This is the rest of the brain over here, which instead of being here, right, with the whatever, it starts shriveling up because all the juice is going this way. And like I said, he was agreeing with me up to a point where I was telling him about truth or lying. It was lying, and that you shouldn't lie, even little white lies. I said it makes you a bad person when you lie, and he did not like that. He was not happy. There's some caveats that I said. If it's for self-defense, like if someone is trying to harm you, maybe like they have some form of, they're going to hurt you or whatever, and they ask, hey, are you able? And they have a bat in their hand or something, and it's okay to say no, right? No, I'm not able, because you're afraid you're going to get hurt. It's one time where it's okay. And there was another time I didn't bring up, but I should have brought up, if it was consensual lying, let's say like a movie, it's not true, like the Lion King's not real, it's a cartoon. It's not real, but you accept it because it's not real. And anyway, so it is a form of lying, but again, it's consensual. I didn't mention that part when we were talking. Anyway, so then I said about the whole lie thing, and he goes, if it's a white lie, it's no big deal. And I said, it's a bigger deal than you think. And then he's like, no, it's not. He gave an example. I said, okay, I broke it down to the principles of essentially. I don't want to exactly go over what he said, because I don't want him to get upset, because I didn't say I was going to talk about him in the video. But essentially, he was telling me that he told a simple little thing just to make whatever situation go away, because it didn't matter either way. Whatever that person was going to accept, it wasn't going to really change too much in the end, but it was easier for him, right? So I broke it down like that. I said, okay, the reason he didn't say in those words, those are my words. I was saying, all right, so you lied because you lied because it made it more comfortable for you, right? So telling the truth would have been slightly more uncomfortable. So it's just easier to lie. And he did not like that, even though it's exactly what he was saying. Right. So I posed it in a much stronger way. I said, what did I say? I said, okay, so you believe, let's call him Jimmy, even though his name's not Jimmy. I don't want to lie in a subject where I'm talking about lying. His name's not Jimmy, but we're going to call him Jimmy just to make it easier. I said, all right, Jimmy, so what you're telling me is your principle is if it's okay to lie as long as a situation is uncomfortable. I posed it like that, and he did not like that at all. He was fighting me on it, meaning he was, he was a little angry. He wasn't angry, but his voice, his voice was, he raised his voice a little bit, and he was talking a lot faster, trying to prove me wrong, essentially, is what it is. And again, it was funny talking to someone about how anger skews your judgment on the truth. And then in the same conversation, they get angry because I said, you're okay with lying as long as it makes you comfortable. And once he knew the boiling it down to that main principle, he heard me say that and he didn't like it. And as opposed to thinking about what he said and like thinking that's actually not a good principle for me to have. Instead of being upset at himself, he was upset at me for saying it. It's one of those, let's say, don't kill the messenger, right? It wasn't me saying that it's okay to lie as long as it gets rid of the uncomfortableness, right? He was the one saying it, and instead of him saying, "Oh, that's not a good principle. Maybe I should change." That anger just manipulated it, and it, I don't know, I guess what's it called, the projection? I'm not sure. I have to look that one up too. All right. So the reason I'm talking about this is because it's a little frustrating when you get down to these kind of points. It's hard to, once someone is upset, once someone is angry, once they have that stance, you can't, it's hard to change their mind. And usually, again, I like to argue, and I do a lot of arguing, so I have a lot of practice as do a lot of people. So when this happens, this inevitably happens. We get to a point where the person I'm talking to gets upset, and once they are upset, there's no rationing them out of it. There's a saying, it goes, you can't ration a man out of something that they didn't ration themselves into. So here's a situation in which he knew that when people get mad, it's a little hard for them to process the information, but then he does get mad. And once he's in it, if I were to try and point to earlier in our conversation about getting mad, it would just make him more mad. And if I were to point out that what I said, it wasn't me who came up with that principle. I'm the one who boiled it down to those points, but it wasn't me who brought up that principle. It was him, and it was his idea. It still does not change anything. I'm using ration to try and convince someone of something they didn't ration themselves into. So what he did is he took what I said, and he just kind of denied it. It's like, no, this is why you're wrong. I go, but I'm not wrong. It's what you said. These are the words you. And people hate it when you do that. When you brush away the mud or the murkiness they're trying to create. When you brush it away, they hate it even more. And so earlier when I said maybe it's my personality that gets people upset, maybe it's not my personality exactly. Maybe it's just the techniques I use to try and break through the emotional barrier. It just causes more anger. So, as far as I can tell, using ration with people who are irrational doesn't work. And if emotion was built around our physiology and it's the substructure of our consciousness, right? Let's say here's emotion or subconscious, and our consciousness is built on it, and all the information goes through the subconscious first, or goes through the emotions first to get to this. Well, then why have I been trying to go for reason when it seems much more it seems much more beneficial or easier to go through the emotion first. What the heck have I been doing for the past 30-something years? Then I thought, great, maybe I've been working the wrong angle this whole time. I haven't really been trying to study emotion. I've been trying to get around it. I kicked that around for a little while. And then I started realizing, well, first I got a little upset. I'm like, what? I can't. Because there's another, it's emotion. I'm talking about emotion again. I was upset. What have I been doing working on ration this whole time when it should have been emotions I should have been working on? So a little sad that I've been doing a lot of, I don't know exactly work, just, on my own time. I've been doing a whole lot of, conversations with people, sure. A little bit of writing, just notes. I've got some notes here that I like to, it doesn't even come out, that I like to do, but. All right. Sad for a little bit. Then I came to the conclusion, it took me a little while in my sadness to realize that, well, in order for me to distinguish between emotion and rationality, right, in order for me to actually talk about or to want to use ration right instead of emotion, I have to be able to figure out what is rational and what is emotional, which means that I at least need to know where the line is. So I can actually define, I have been in some way defining where the emotional aspect of arguments and positions that people have, because I have to know where, in order for me to know what rationale is, I need to also know what emotion is. So at least in that sense, I have been studying emotion, right? I've also tried to have arguments in which I know if I go down a certain line of reasoning, it's going to make people emotional. So I know to stay away from that as well. So there's another example of me knowing, at least somewhat studying emotion based on me trying to stick to reason. So now I have, as far as I can tell, I've been able to find out where emotion is by kind of feeling around the outside. Maybe just a little bit of inside. Kind of, is it like if you're in a dark room and you're trying to, and there's things in the room and you're trying to navigate around it by touching the outside of it and trying to figure out what it is by just feeling up the borders? That's how I feel like I am with the emotional, keep wanting to say emotional argument. Maybe it's a better word for it. So now that I know that, well, now that I believe, I don't know for sure, but it's a theory, that in order to convince people, it's easier to do it emotionally. Should I go further in that route? Well, I don't want to manipulate people. I don't want to manipulate people and do things in an immoral way. So I don't know. It's a weird question. Maybe as long as I do both, right? I do, or maybe all three. Try and convince people emotionally, as long as that emotionally is also, as long as that emotional way is also using reason, right? Because they don't always have to be, they don't always have to be separate. They could be in the same line. So use emotion as long as I'm also using, it's in line with reason and it's also moral. Nice little trifecta. Hopefully that'll work out for me better. I don't know if it will. Who knows? I've been working on this argument for a very long time. I've been listening to a lot of people online to try and figure out what they're trying to do as well. And they don't seem to be having that much more success. It's more like they create a presence online. They talk about rationality, and people who are rational flock to them. And people that are fence sitters, maybe they switch over. They kind of lean over to the side, but I don't see a whole lot of people on the other side crossing over to his side because of rationale. Anyway, now that I see that, hopefully I can create something, a better strategy in order to convince people about what the truth is. 'Cause that's really ultimately one of my goals, to figure out the truth. What truth? Any truth, all truth. I'm sure you've been in that same situation where you talk to someone and they're just denying what the truth is. Denying it because of that anger system. That anger blocks their ability to see the truth or to even know what it is. I'm sure I've had that all the time. Oh man, kind of I was trying to come up with the situation, but here's one. Sometimes road rage. I'm with somebody. Let's say I'm in the passenger seat and we're driving. All of a sudden they get cut off, and that rage, that anger, like, what is this other person doing? They're a moron. They're an idiot. And I saw the same thing, but since I'm not driving, I'm not the one trying to fight, and fight for room to drive. And what I saw is a person trying to get into the lane, but they didn't see our car. But the person in rage doesn't process that because all they want is rage. That anger feeds more anger. And I believe if I believe the system I'm talking about, where emotion is more powerful than reason, at times, not always, at times, then maybe I can use emotion to try and convince other people to not be that emotional. What do I mean? Anger. So one of the things I'm talking about is fighting anger. One of the ways to fight anger, maybe comedy. I'm not going to tell a joke, but maybe an interesting story. I know anger is real powerful, so it's kind of hard. I'm still working on that one. But the opposite is true as well. So let's say someone is scared and they need to act. Maybe they're in a weird position where someone is being menacing and they're scared. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to, try to be as small as possible, trying to stay away from the person's radar. And so they're trying not to move. They're trying not to do anything to draw attention. It's another situation where they might not have rationed themselves into, right? It's just an emotional response to whatever fear. But a counter to that is anger. If they were to get angry, anger sometimes does embolden people. It makes them more courageous, right? If you ever, I'm sure you've had this situation too, where you got angry and you did something. Maybe you stood up for yourself, or you yelled, you stood up for someone else, or you were in line and someone cut someone in front of them. You got, hey, what are you doing? Get out of line. Oh, that makes me mad too when people cut in front of other people who are in front of me, right? They didn't cut me in front of me, but they did cut in front of someone else, and that someone else was in front of me. It's still basically the same thing, still cutting me. It just makes me mad. And I'm sure you've been in a situation where you yelled out in a situation and maybe, it fixed it or it helped or whatever. And then a few minutes later, when you're not angry, you start realizing, wait a minute, that's not something like me. I don't usually do that, right? So there is that. Changing someone, I think it's easier to get someone to be angry than to not be angry. But I don't know, maybe it is, if someone is upset, back to the example about driving and road rage, telling a joke might help change that person's mind or help change that person's emotional state. I know that every now and then I'll be having a rough day, and then I'll listen to some stand-up comedy, and it just changes it around. So there is that. So to sum up, I do want to do some research into using emotional arguments. Again, I don't know if I'm going to stick with that term, to try and help change people's minds from non-truth to truth.